It's kind of interesting to see all these boxes here and just let your mind wander. I'm supposing that none of you will ever know what happened to those things, but just think about the possibilities. You know, they mentioned in the video about this kid opening one who needed a coat, and he got a coat. Though most of the people we were seeing didn't need coats, obviously, because the climate they were in, at least. But we hear these stories every now and then about these remarkable coincidences that take place where we think it couldn't be anything other than the hand of God. Now, I'm not necessarily the best person to testify to truth. According to some people I know, at least, or who know me, I should say, I had a college roommate who said, Foster, you will lie when the truth is handy. I was something of a practical joker at one time in my life. I have been totally serious since that time, of course. I'm not going to read the scripture because you have it on the back of the bulletin today. However, there's one line that I was going to add to what I was going to read later on, and that is the line that, and Pilate said, "What is truth?" And then Pilate went back out to talk to the other people where they were trying to decide what the faith of Jesus would be. So that's the scripture for the day, because I'll refer to that, what is truth, every now and then at least, because we have it all in our mind. Mark Twain, one of my favorite authors, had two competing comments about truth. The first one was, truth is a precious commodity, therefore we should use it sparingly. The other was, always tell the truth. It will please some people and then astonish the rest. Now, I don't know about any of you, but I've been called to testify in 2 different trials in my lifetime. If you've ever had to do that, you realize, and we've all seen the TV shows, you are sworn in, promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Your hand on a Bible sometimes, maybe on something else, at other times at least. And we have this kind of idea in the back of our minds what truth really is. We normally think truth is something that's verifiable. It's data-driven or whatever, it's objective and so forth, until we start to get into the discussion of it. So in the first trial, it was a civil case, and it was a lawsuit over contractual obligation of some kind. And the person who was being sued had also been a contractor for some work on our house. And so I was sworn in, took the witness stand, and they asked me all kinds of questions, which basically were, what was my opinion about this, that, and the other thing, at least. So I was thinking, okay, how do they know that my opinion's worth anything here? Well, obviously, I was not the only person who was offering opinions that day. So the testimony of many people is much better than the testimony of one person. So if you multiply your testimonies, you're more likely to get some response to something that could be true. Now, the other trial, I never wound up going there. I was called because I was the pastor of a congregation where one of the members was being charged with a form of abuse, domestic abuse. And because I'd visited in the home various times, and I'd seen the family together various times, I was going to be asked to report on the interaction I'd seen in the family. Basically, the defendant wanted somebody who would speak up on his behalf. And I persuaded the lawyer that I would not be a very friendly witness because I'd seen enough and heard enough that he probably didn't want me on testifying for his side. At least he decided to be a good point, maybe just let me skip that part at least. I've also been called for jury duty 6 or 8 times. That's unusual, but I don't know what the big deal is about my name. But so I've been a lot of this testify stuff going on. But we'll still join with Pilate. What is truth? And John doesn't give an answer to that. Now, if you want the truth, You got these billboards on the interstates out there that says, for truth, call 1-800 whatever, and that they'll tell you what the truth is. There's a religious question. For truth, there is evidence, there's proof, and so forth in there. Whether or not you'd say it's objective, we don't know at least. I suspect that for most of us, truth is in the eye of the beholder. That is, we see what we look for. We find what we look for. I love to go to Cage Cove in Smoky Mountains. I love to take the drive through there because a lot of times you see black bears in there. And so I'm always looking for bears. And I always see some. The majority of them turn out to be tree stumps. But 100 to 150 feet into the woods, a tree stump and a black bear look just alike, except one of them sometimes moves. I've never yet taken a picture of a stump, but I've come really close sometimes, at least. But you see a lot more. If I'm out in the turkey season, I see a lot of turkeys as well. Generally speaking, they're cedar trees about this tall because they look just like a turkey in the mist, if you will. So we tend to find what we're looking for, if you will. And we may focus on chosen truth. What we choose for truth is something that agrees with what we already believe. I recall somebody gave me my first Bible back when I was in the 30s, and in my 30s, not the 30s. I'm old, but not quite that old at least. But anyhow, I was looking at that Bible some years after I got it and looking where I'd underlined and realized I underlined things that I agreed with and things that were the tough questions I tended to ignore, at least in there. So we may all do that sometimes. For example, there is a scripture that says somebody's asking about the kingdom, and Jesus says, you can't enter the kingdom unless you're born again. And there's millions of people who take that quite literally. There's another place where the same question, and it said, the answer is, sell all you have, give to the poor, and come follow me. I would say that there's not that many people who think that's the truth. The truth over here is one you can do one time. The truth over here, that's going to hurt me a little bit, So maybe that's not true for me. It's true. It was true for them at that time, at least. My sister-in-law, and I married into the church, and so I don't have this history that back before I was 30 or so, because I think I was 30 when I was baptized. But anyhow, my sister-in-law came up to me one day at a gathering and said, is your mother any closer to accepting the truth? And my response was, I think she believes she already has. Her truth was Baptist, and she said she was not a really good Baptist because she had been in our church one day and heard Karen Freeberg preach, who was pastor at the 11th congregation at the time. She said, I don't see why we can't do that. I guess I'm not a very good Baptist, she said. But anyhow, but I knew what my sister-in-law was talking about. She was saying that this church possesses the truth. Not only that, we're pretty exclusive with the truth we possess. That we're the one true church. We got over all the others at least, and that was the truth that she was espousing at the time. John is a great believer in the truth. I haven't done the counting, but I do believe that he uses the word truth more times in his gospel than it is used in all the rest of the New Testament combined, because it's like every other paragraph has truth in it. So he's a great believer there. I am the way, the truth, and the light. Life is one of them. When you've seen me, you see the Father is another one. My disciples will be known how they love one another. These are common themes throughout the Gospel of John. And the one that talks about my disciples will be known by how they love one another kind of perked my curiosity a little bit. I was in Kidron, Ohio, several years ago at the Mennonite Center for Peace. It's a very small location. I think the whole thing would fit in this sanctuary probably. But the Mennonites and the Anabaptists in general, but Mennonites are known for being a peace church. And they had this poster on there that I just loved. Wall poster says, a modest proposal for peace. Let all the Christians of the world agree they will not kill each other. Now, you take a look at that, and you can start poking holes in it. Well, but how about everybody? This is a beginning point. Christians want to do something for peace? Here's how you start. But what does it mean to not kill each other? Let's say we're going to take a pledge of some kind, that we're going to be movers and shakers for peace. So our starting point might be, I resolved not to shoot any other Christians. That is not a real difficult thing. The chances are really good that none of us in here are going to shoot anybody. And if we are drawn to shoot somebody, we should ask them if they're Christian first, I suppose. But nonetheless, let's say, I resolve that I will not shoot any other Christians. We can do that. That's kind of easy. I resolve not to own shares of stock in any firms that produce weapons which are used to kill other Christians. Yeah, I can probably, if I happen to own stock in something, I don't know what it would be. There's plenty of other stocks out there. Probably wouldn't cost me too much to diversify in that regard. I resolve not to buy goods produced by Christians who work in conditions which shortens their lives, leading to the death of Christians. Now, are we getting a little pinched here on this one? Now, we're going to have to do something just a little bit more than just lip service there. We're going to have to do a little investigation. Okay. Well, if you want to do that one, then what about this one? I resolve not to sit idly by when there is injustice in the world that results in Christians starving. Or replace starving with whatever you want to. Christians being enslaved. Now you're starting to get to where it pinches all of us just a little bit to do that. That is digging a little deeper than just the lip service that we sometimes get into. The same thing would be perhaps true of truth. How do we dig into the truth a little bit? The truth that John speaks of, in my opinion, is the opposite of wrongdoing. It's not just facts, not just data, not something's verifiable information. It's a lot harder for us in the Western society to deal with this because we're used to making our decisions individually. My rights outweigh your rights. That's kind of the way a lot of us look at it, at least. So we look at it kind of individually, and we look at it, pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps kind of thing, and you can do the same thing. This passage is written in an Eastern world situation where the community is more important than the collection, than the individuals, because they look out for one another. That's kind of their history, at least. And Jesus speaks from that kind of community where we are looking out for each other. We take responsibility for the welfare of one another, if you will. Christians will be known by the way they love. In John and other places, truth is the possibility of a new way of life. In John, truth is, Jesus shows us just how accessible God is. That's good news in a lot of situations, how accessible God is. There's a story, a post-resurrection story, where these guys are walking along the road from Jerusalem to Emmaus. And the stranger shows up where we readers realize the stranger is Jesus, but they don't know that. And as night falls, they all stop to spend the night someplace. And Jesus has been talking to them all the way. And they get into this particular place, and he breaks bread for them. And suddenly, with the breaking of the bread, their eyes are opened and they realize they're seeing Jesus. Well, it is really a Eucharist story or a communion story, where in communion, we become aware of the presence of the Father and the Son. One author said this. He says, I don't know if that particular story really happened or not, but to me there's no truer part of the Bible than that says how you can be in the presence of and see Jesus and God. Because Jesus has already said, when you have seen me, you have seen God. The truth also is how much we are valued in the eyes of God. I'm not going to take a poll here, but I would bet that there's at least a couple of people here who were told in their earlier years, you'll never amount to anything. I have talked to people who are my age who still hurt because they were told that by a parent, maybe repeatedly at least. You'll never amount to anything. The feeling of worth, we tend to carry, many of us do this, tend to carry this feeling that we are not worthy of forgiveness, not worthy of inclusion, something like that. I was thinking about, in these boxes, stories from some of my background. The kids who received free lunches when I was in school, in other schools at least, they had a different colored lunch ticket. Everybody who paid for their own lunch got green. They got orange because it was free. I know of kids who would not go eat lunch because they didn't feel worthy to get a free lunch somehow. And it stuck with them for 40 or 50 years. I don't know what the purpose was to do that. Today, we'd probably be taking them to court. But nonetheless, there are things that have taken place in our lives that make us feel like we're less than acceptable to other people, including God, that we somehow don't measure up. There are some who would say, this is a Bible, by the way, some would say everything between these covers is truth. There are others who would say, well, let's check the version first. This is the Revised English Bible, by the way. I took a great deal of care in selecting which Bible I brought today. Had to be one I could hold in one hand. The print had to be big enough I could read it. Didn't have to, it turns out, because the scripture on the back of the deal, but that was my selection criteria. I've had the Bible for a number of years. There's others who say, I believe the truth is between those pages, but you kind of have to winnow it out a little bit, if you will. And there might be others who would say, I want to check and see what's plausible, and I will use my God-given intelligence to figure out what is true and what's maybe something else at least. There was a scripture I wanted to refer to today, and I was pretty sure it was in John chapter 8, and went to John chapter 8 in here, couldn't find it. Well, obviously, I'm not really great about my scripture memory anyway, so maybe it's somewhere else in John. So I summed through all of John, couldn't. Finally, I looked at John again. The John in this Bible starts with verse 12 in chapter 8. Verses 1 through 11 are not there. Well, guess what's 1 through 11? The one I was looking for. Is the story of Jesus being in a group of people, and the religious people of the day bring this woman up to him and say this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law says that women must be stoned, and by the law says women. Men get off scot-free, but women get stoned for adultery in that particular time. And what do you say? And he draws in the sand and so forth, or writes in the sand or dirt, whatever. And basically he says, whoever you who are without sin, cast the first stone. And then the end result is, she says, no one's accusing me. He says, neither do I condemn you. Go your way and sin no more. And that's it. Now, why is it not in all versions of the Bible? We don't know precisely why it is missing. We know that it was in the Gospel of Luke in some versions of the Bible. We know that some versions of the Bible have it in John. Some versions of the Bible skip it. In this particular case, it's a footnote, another part of this Bible at least. Why would it be left out? Because it's a story that, to me, shows us more about who Jesus is than almost any story. But if you believe in the law, then you can't put something in the Bible that refutes that. So my suspicion is, people said, we can't have that because adultery is an unforgivable sin. I'm leading up to something. I was a couple of us were in a small congregation in a state in another galaxy some years ago, doing a weekend thing where it was a class, testify and preaching, teaching kind of event. And there was a woman there who wanted to speak privately after the Saturday service, or the Saturday gathering at least. It turned out that she had cheated on her husband a few years prior to that, and it was just eating her alive. It was just, her life was miserable because she was convinced that she had done something unforgivable, that God no longer cared for her, and all of these kind of things. Now, what does it mean to somebody like that when they hear the story that in some cases was left out of the Bible that says, you're not condemned? You're forgiven. That is a freeing thing. That is a truth that is not always found in people's lives. Because you see, she has encountered a God who she thought had turned his back on her, but realized that that God was still with her. She had done something that she regarded as being unforgivable, and now her mind didn't have to haunt her for the rest of her life because she realized God was still present with her, and frankly had been present as much as allowable in the intervening years at least. But God was still with her then and with her now. And that's the truth.